I am here in Marbella mainly for the production of a yoga online course with my partner Nicole. However, we are also here to enjoy the weather as well as look and see whether or not this is actually a place where we could see ourselves moving toward, and or renting an apartment or being for longer periods of time. That whole process took more energy than I thought in terms of just simply being here, doing the video productions, doing the sorting and registering all the files so that they are definitely going to be on the file server or the hard drives that we have dedicated for them, and to not mess anything up. Of course, it also means that we want to enjoy being around here, and that does not necessarily mean that you want to actually create a video every single day whilst you're creating an online course, whilst you're creating videos for YouTube, for the yoga channel, and at the same time trying to enjoy the scenery, trying to go out for dinner sometimes, but also figure stuff out, like for example, what are nice apartments around here, how much do they cost, do you find a realtor or a real estate agent to talk to, and maybe figure out whether or not this is the right place for you. All of that takes a lot of energy, and it meant that one thing had to be taken out of the consideration, or at least stepped back significantly, and I chose to not produce as many videos as to do the other things, essentially. And now with that, I want to share more about the whole story as to what is around here, how did I end up here, and also what might happen here or might not. And that all starts with that I got inspired to check out Marbella when I watched the vlogs of Jon Olsen and Yanni Diller, and I think I've mentioned this before. I think that this is a really interesting place, and if you look at the, for example, the weather charts for this area, it is really, really nice all year round. It has clean air, you have the oceans right there, you have nature, you have mountains, you have an interesting climate, which is really not too hot, at least not half the year, which is over the winter and stuff like that, which is more interesting to me. There's also a very touristic time in July, June, and August, and of course that's something where I wouldn't necessarily want to be here probably. However, the other parts of this is really cool. Now, a couple of years ago, I actually visited Marbella, but it was just for one day, and we actually stayed more north, and that was around Fuengirola, I think that's how you call it, or Mijas. That's a whole different story if you want to check out one place, but then you stay a little bit off to that. Now, this time around, we are literally in Marbella. Depending on what you qualify as Marbella, we are in Nueva Andalusia, which is also where Puerto Banús is. And as I've mentioned before, where also Jon Olsen had his villas, essentially. And we actually try to look where they are and just at least get a glance from afar. Now, this part of town is actually really nice, and we actually quite liked it. And yesterday we took a tour into basically the center of Marbella, and that was, interestingly, by far not as interesting to me and to Nicole as well as this part of town is, where you have more villas, apartment complexes. It's more a urban area and residential area, probably. Also a lot of golf courses around here. So overall, it's a really interesting place. It also carries a really interesting energy with it, which was quite interesting to experience. You see a lot of Porsche cars, you also see a lot of Ferraris, and I think we also spotted a Bugatti here and there. And that's one thing that is really interesting. Now, I'm not really a car person, so that's something that also may be taken into consideration, but at least it's a different vibe that you get here versus in other places. You feel that there are certain amounts of wealth around here. And that, of course, is also granted that a lot of people are basically having a vacation home here. It's a place where people come to have their vacations or retire, essentially. There's a lot of people in that regard, but that also has a certain vibe with it, because a lot of those people either did a really good job or they built something. They built a company and a business, and now they made their fortune, and they are here because they want to enjoy life more. A lot of those things feel really motivating to me, and to see those buildings around that are really pretty is really something that is quite different from when you are just in a regular city, I would say. However, it also can feel overwhelming seeing all too much wealth, which sometimes also feels very much unreachable, if it's even necessary. So those kind of questions also ruminate. Then we started to look into basically what would it mean to live here long term, and do we want that? And what would we want if so? Now that all comes with its own challenge because, of course, Nicole has a yoga studio in Germany, which would need to be changed in the way that it is run right now to also be able to, so that Nicole doesn't have to be there actually teaching the classes. And that was part of the plan from the get-go, to be able to have that run independently. But it's still a transitional challenge, and with the whole last year being a really hard year to even start a yoga studio, we will see how that actually pans out. But what it meant for actually finding a place here, or being able to potentially have a second home here, or a permanent home, and then run the studio from here, all that meant that we wouldn't want to essentially be here full time. It would be a place where we would want to spend a couple of months at the time and then maybe travel more or go back to Germany to Hof, where the yoga studio is, and stuff like that. So all of those considerations taken into account, we actually looked at apartments, how much it would cost to rent, how much it would cost to buy, which is currently absurd in our currently situation, and also tying up just a bunch of cash in the down payment and such things. So not very smart investment ideas if you are trying to also build a business. We also got a chance to talk to someone who is a realtor around here and a real estate agent essentially working here. And they told us that it is basically impossible to rent something and then be allowed to also Airbnb it for example, if you want to leave for 2 months and then you want to rent it to other people in the meantime. Now that was something that sounded really promising to the beginning, because this is a place where a lot of travel is happening. So people are used to running Airbnbs. There is infrastructure for this type of stuff. But at the same time, it's understandable that if you just rent something to someone, you don't want them to short-term rent it to other people. Now, I'm sure there might be ways to get around this. However, just the amount of work that we would have to go and do and get into doesn't seem all too interesting anymore. And that also brings up another interesting aspect, which is that being here, traveling, living out of a suitcase, and this time around, it's still very much minimal. We both have a big suitcase, which is relatively heavy, with all the video gear, the yoga equipment, and stuff like that. But more and more, we are noticing that as we are building our businesses, we have tools that we need, and those tools provide an income. And that also means that potentially we could even travel with, let's say, 2 suitcases per person, or at least 1 additional suitcase between us, and have all the equipment that we want and travel the world. So that disregards the limitation of just one home base completely. And of course, I already know that type of lifestyle, and I've been doing that, or I have done that for a couple of years already. And now this brings up this whole new freedom and this knowledge, or the information that we wouldn't be allowed to Airbnb our space if we rented here. It didn't really blow us off, because it didn't bother us, because we already had an alternative. So in a way, it's all forming a really nice pathway to a future, which really looks very promising. Now, again, we are still in the early stages of this whole process, and this is just a very early experience of even just tapping our toes back into the life of a digital nomad, traveling and earning money on the road. But it is very much an interesting journey to begin with and to step back into from my point of view. Now, I'm really excited, and I really am interested in checking back with places like, for example, the Nomad Cruise, if they are, or when they are happening again, maybe 2022 in autumn or something. And of course, also going back to places like Chiang Mai, Bali, and the Mediterranean areas, or also Portugal and also with the Canary Islands. All of that is really, really interesting, and a completely different mindset again, because of course it also brings back the idea of how much do you actually need to produce these types of videos? How much gear do you want to travel with? Do you have to travel with? Is it really sensible to bring multiple cameras? Is it really useful to bring podcasting equipment? That is really fascinating to me to, again, kind of like think about all of those things. And who knows, long term, maybe there will be time and place for an apartment, or even buying a real estate investment at some point. But that doesn't sound all too interesting right now with the constraints that we are working with.